Hi, my name is Paul Galena. I am the wood flooring support and technician person at odie'soil. So when you call with anything and everything have to do with wood floors, you'll probably be talking to me. I'm also been traveling the country, training many floor guys, including some of the top at the top level of our industry. Some of you who know me know that I have spent decades in manufacturing inlays and designs. And this floor is one of mine, designed and fabricated 100% in-house. And so far, this floor, believe it or not, it's in its raw state. Even though you see color on it, it is white oak and maple. It has been treated with a reactive coloring process. So there's no finish, no stain. Okay, this is just a chemical reaction that I have concocted over the years with different ratios of different chemicals to get this color. And so for all intents and purposes, this is raw wood, and we're just starting the finishing process with odie'soil. You 9 times out of 10 would be mixing pigment into either the super duper oil, which is the thinner consistency of the two main oils that wood floor guys will use, which is the super duper oil, the thinner one. You can maybe zoom in then on this one. Or if you're gonna go for a one coat process, you'll probably go right to the universal oil. The best overall performance and muscle is in the universal. However, if you're gonna do a 2-coat system, or especially when you're gonna mix pigment into the oil, you are better off starting with the super duper due to its thinner consistency. For obvious reasons, it will mix better with pigments, which is, these pigments are powder. They come in a powder form. So when you add a lot of powder to the already thick universal oil, it can become a little difficult to work with, and you have to add solvents. So to kind of backtrack, you're swimming against the current at that point. So why not just start with the thinner oil, the super duper, and you can add more pigment to it. It's better for staining, right? So I'm not going to be adding pigment this time because the color came from the reactive process. But when you're doing a 2-coat system, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the thinner oil first, and then as a second application, you can do 24 hours, but if you have the time, I like to wait 48 hours. There's less of a chance of reactivating the oil. But the thinner super duper oil rarely will be activated even in 24 hours. But even if it's a 5% chance, why take that chance if I have the time, which I do, because this is my house. So that's right with this floor. Anyway, when you start with any of the oils, first thing you do is you need to mix it up. When I open the next jar, you'll be able to compare the differences. They are notable. Look at the beautiful reactive chemical process even on my skin. Anyway, if you can tell, the wax is on the bottom, the oil is on top. So it's very important that this jar gets stirred very well. And throughout the process, give it a stir once in a while. If I were to drip on the floor right now, it wouldn't matter. You have plenty of open time to blend it in. Okay, stir it really well. Then, for the edges, we're going to use the center of the red pad to rub the edges in. And we're going to use a red pad on the buffer to work the oil in. I prefer to start with the edges, get that out of the way. You will step on the oil during use, it's okay, but it's just easier to start with the edges. So, here. Circular motion, back and forth, back and forth. You don't want to just kind of brush it on or one of these things and thinking you're done. Odie'soil, the heart and the soul and the performance of the oil comes from basically kicking his butt. Meaning, don't be easy with it, don't be nice with it, rub it in hard, work it, because that is how it will become part of the wood. I'm putting a bit too much, so I don't want to work all that. I'm staying away from the edge for a while, because I don't want to put a puddle against the trim. By the way, reactive chemicals are not stains or paints, so this will wipe off with water. That's why we weren't taping it off, didn't bother, because it will be much easier and faster to just simply wipe it off. Look at the color changing. I knew this was going to happen because this is not the color I was after. This is the color I was after. So you have to anticipate the oil changing the color, right? You can't judge even a regular stain with what the stain itself looks like, unless you're looking at it when it's wet perhaps. But once it dries, reactives as well as dyes and stains, they all dry a totally different color. So anyway, work it in real well. I spent 35 years in New York refinishing floors, which is why I have a very old buffer on. You will see in a minute. My guys came up with a trick for the edges. I don't want you to start doing it that way. Excuse me. It's not the fumes. There are no fumes that made me cough. This smells citrusy, wonderful smell. Number one comment you'll get from customers is, oh my God, it smells so good. Neighbors come over and they're gonna wanna have you refinish their floors with odie'soil just for the smell. Anyway, so I was saying that my guys came up with a trick for the edges with a heavy 5x7, an old Makita, rectangular, random orbit, vibrating sander for lack of a better word. But it was heavy. And that did a great job with a red pad cut out underneath it to buzz along the edges quickly. And just use kind of your hand just for the corners, but everything else was done with a 5x7. The little light, small, random orbit sanders can work, but when you have the weight, we prefer using that big one. Anyway, rub down all the edges, then we'll come back with the buffer to do the rest of it. Okay, I'm done rubbing in the edges in a U shape. I went up to about the light switch. And now I'm going to do the red pad with the buffer. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, by the way, you always want to have a towel in your hand because you're constantly wiping your hand, otherwise things get slippery. The worst thing that can happen is you're gonna have soft skin, that's it. Odie's is extremely safe, there's nothing toxic in there. It's safe to breathe in and safe to handle and touch, but it's slippery, so wiping your hand is easy. So, I'm gonna show you both ways of applying. One directly into the pad, and the second is directly onto the floor. Once I get going, I prefer version 2, meaning drip on the floor, so I don't have to stop and go and take the pad off and keep putting oil onto the pad. But initially, because the pad's gonna want to feed itself some of the oil, so when you start, you're gonna waste a little oil going into the pad, right? And then that kind of stops after a while. So to start with, I will go ahead and pour a little bit of oil directly into the pad. So, I love putting odie'soil on the modern buffers of today, meaning power drive or any of those, because they're heavy and they're the catalysts of the buffers, right? But when I go visit guys on the field, many companies have these old beat up standard buffers. So I purposely wanted to show you, you don't need the fancy new modern buffers to apply odies with. When I use the power drive with both weights on it, you'll see I heal this buffer. This is a heavy buffer too, that's why I like this one. For a regular 110 buffer, this one is amazing because it's really heavy. And the more weight, the better as far as applying the oil, because you want friction and heat. Okay, and you get friction and heat from weight. So use your heaviest buffer. So this is a happy medium, an old beat up, really old beat up, but heavy, regular 175 RPM buffer will demonstrate that you don't need the fancy ones. But if you can get your hands on one of those, more modern ones that are heavier, especially with the weights, you will have to heal the buffer less. So you'll see what I mean. I'll show you when I heal the buffer. Yeah, you should. I want to cut this out. All right, so normally I would pour a line on the floor, which I will do next, but for now, I got oil in the pad, right? First I'm gonna go fast just to kind of spread the oil approximately. This is not the application. I'm just sort of getting an approximately even coverage onto the floor. This is way too fast for the application. This is just the first general spreading, okay? Do not confuse. It's the most important part. This is not how you handle the buffer with oldies. I know with the other oils you can go fast like this, because their linseed oil mixed with isocyanates for the most part, they really are more like glycol qualities. Okay, now that it's on the floor, odies is a true hard wax oil. I've been calling odies a structural oil, as opposed to pretty much everything else that I'm aware of on the market is what I call a topical oil. A structural oil becomes part of the wood, becomes part of the structure. That is why I call it structural oil. And it's a really quick, easy way to differentiate odies from the rest. Is anything that's oil mixed with isocyanates, or there's some more modern catalysts are coming out, but 95% of what's on the market, 99% of what's on the market currently, and all the big names you guys know, are isocyanates in part B mixed with linseed oil in part A. Once you mix linseed oil with isocyanates, that is the dictionary definition of polyurethane. So basically you made a thin white on poly, but it's a film. Odies is not a film. Odies is a structural oil that becomes part of the wood, which is why you have to apply it differently. It is because it's not a film, it's not enough to just wipe it on fast and walk away. You have to work it in, and friction and heat will do two things. Drive the oil deeper, the proper amount of oil, stretch the oil further, meaning you're not going to leave too much oil on the floor, which will make it difficult to remove. The next step will be buff off. That will take a lot longer if you put too much oil on the floor. So when you heal the buffer, not only does it create more friction and heat and drives more oil into the floor, but it also stretches the oil further. You get more mileage out of the same little bit of oil. And that will make your step 2 buff off easier. But also, very importantly, that friction and heat also starts the polymerization process. So for all these reasons, it's important that what I'm about to do next is what you remember, not the real quick spreading, but the very, very slow, 1 inch per second speed. And I'll be also healing the buffer to get more friction. And you're really stretching the oil even more that way. So. Since I did about this much, 4 feet, 3-4 feet, I could kind of work on that section. It's your call. I find it easier to remember if I do straight lines. Again, I'm putting pressure, I'm healing the buffer. So I'm pushing down with my right handle. By the way, there is some touch-up that will be necessary on this floor. Won't get into it too much, but that's the white spot. It will be fixed between oils. Some of the touch-ups I don't like to do when it's the raw wood with the reactive. For obvious reasons, the oil will protect the finish for me to do touch-ups. number 2, or B, from this point on, at first I fed the pad. But from this point on, I'm not going to be stopping and removing the pad and pouring oil into the pad every time. I prefer to just simply do this. You could also do a pancake on the floor, pancake shaped pour puddle. I like this better. First I'm gonna drive the buffer fast to pick this up and sort of approximately distribute it. That's not the application, that's just an approximate distribution of the oil. Then I'll come back to the slow actual application. Applying the oil at this speed, we'll have to be sending the Odie's police out to you. That's a big no-no. This is just a distribution. At Odie's, we don't be swinging the buffer around. So now, the oil is on, approximately spread over the area. Now I'm working it in. Now I'm going slow, working it in. Coming out beautiful. You can see that as I'm working this slowly, I'm leaving these half, crescent moon shaped little lines that you can't see from there. That's what I want to see, because that means the wood has been fully fed. And there's a little bit extra that cannot go anywhere. That's perfect. That's our visual, that's my visual cue to know that there's enough oil on the floor. I don't need to be adding more. Now, if you don't heal the buffer, Beck, can you see where it's kind of dry and wet? Is that visible on the camera? Okay. You see there's a lot of oil on the floor. I'm driving it in. But without healing the buffer, watch what happens. There's plenty of oil on the pad. Nothing is happening. The oil from the pad is not going in the wood. But when I heal, you can see this patch is darker. I don't know if it shows on the camera. Can you see it on the camera? But no, not really. Okay, when I healed the buffer, immediately oil stayed up and got worked into the wood. When it was just kind of skimming, moving the buffer back and forth fast, without it actually slow, I was moving it slow, but not healing it, nothing is happening. Okay? So it's important that you drive that oil in. I showed you that there is because here I smeared, very superficially smeared some oil on top, so it fools the eye. If you're just kind of going like this, fast back and forth, you might think you oiled the floor, but in fact you didn't. As the demonstration here showed, when you don't have that superficial oil on top, nothing is actually getting worked in. And just because there's superficial oil here, it's not getting worked in either. And you walk away from the job thinking you oiled the floor, and it's not going to perform well. It's not going to develop its waterproofing properties. It's just not going to perform well. The durability won't be there. The performance against water and chemicals and everything else won't be there. So it's very important that the oil has to be worked in slowly, and that is where the muscle and the performance is. Remember, there is no heat and friction without slow speed. since we completed the oiling, so the above section begins, which has two parts to it. One white pad, and then these rags. However, you don't have to do the white pad along the edges. You can wipe the edges off with the rag right away. And then for the main floor, we'll do both the white pad and the rags. So, when you first start to wipe it off, buff it off, you feel some resistance at first. And suddenly, it kind of glides easy. When it glides easy, that means you got all the excess off. So when you can't really see because there's a wall there and there's no shine, there's no way to see the shine and what is going on, you can feel it. When there's resistance, just keep going back and forth, and suddenly you'll feel that it just suddenly glides very easily. Then you're good. Okay, so now I wiped up the edges with the towel. Now the white pad under the buffer. Then we'll do the towels under the white pad. So the buffer has two parts to it with the buffer. You don't have to heal the buffer this time, but you still have to go slow. Must be removed. There's only two reasons why you have performance issues with odie'soil. One, not enough oil was properly worked in, right? So there's not enough oil in the wood, and for which we talked about friction and heat and going slow and healing the buffer. And two is not removing everything that didn't become part of the wood. Because with odie'soil, since there is no isocyanate part B that would catalyze it to form a film, the wood is the catalyst and oxygen. So any oil that didn't become part of the wood is just going to sit on top, and it only has oxygen to basically form this annoying chalky film with that's going to scratch easily. Instead of repelling water and chemical, it's going to trap it. And trap dirt as well. It's going to look dull, lifeless, and all these other issues you don't want. So everything that didn't become part of the wood must be removed with this buff-off process. Very important. All right, done with the white pad. Tiny little bit. The first pad was a lot more oil on it. Kept changing it. I used two pads for this space, pad and a half, let's say. Remember when I said that you gotta remove all of the oil that didn't become part of the wood because there is no part B catalyst. That's not something Odie's is lacking. Because some hard wax oils, probably all of them, have some sort of a catalyst, either in part B or sometimes already the isocyanates are already mixed into the oil. Odie's has no isocyanates, has no catalyst. And this brings us to, I need you to think this through with me. This is not something Odie's is lacking. This is actually a benefit, a huge feature, which is what makes Odie's superior. It is what makes being a structural oil possible. Because once you have a catalyst, think about this. The oil is going to catalyze with the catalyst, right? That's the catalyst's job of the catalyst, is to catalyze the oil. So if the oil catalyzes with the catalyst instead of the wood, that sounds like a bad thing, right? Well, indeed, it cannot become part of the wood because it cannot catalyze with the wood. It has now catalyzed with another chemical. So therefore, it forms a film, which brings me to the next point, which I don't know if any of you ever thought about, but it makes a lot of sense. How come all the other hard wax oils ask you to sand, stop sanding at about 100, 120? That's because they need the scratch pattern, because it's a mechanically bonding finish. Once it forms a film, you need a scratch pattern to bond. Odie's has no limitation of the sanding. You can sand up to the usual, what you normally do, 100, 120, 150, that's fine. That's really what I did here, is 120. But you can also sand up to 1,000. 2,000, 5,000, it doesn't matter, because Odie's doesn't require a mechanical bond. It is a truly molecularly bonding finish, which is why we call Odie's a structural oil, because it becomes part of the structure of the wood. Well, how could it become part of the structure of the wood if it is forced to catalyze with something else and form a film? So again, sorry to go on a bit of a tangent here, but the reason for that is it's so important to understand why you have to apply Odie's differently. It's not enough just to wipe it on. And if every oil pretty much calls for removal of excess, but it's a bigger issue with Odie's, because at least, if I can put it that way, those other oils have a catalyst. So something becomes of that extra oil, it can catalyze with the catalyst. But since there is no catalyst with Odie's, what happens with the extra oil that isn't removed? It's a bigger pain in the you-know-what. So you need to remove it. It is a bigger deal, more important than what you might think or you'd be used to if you used other products. So, structural oil versus topical oils. That is the main difference. And the huge benefit of Odie's is that it is a structural oil. It is tung oil based. Tung oil has superior properties. It's a superior foundation to start with than linseed oil, right? It has much better water resistance, chemical resistance. It is molecularly the smallest, so therefore it can really get into the wood. That is what makes it stick to anything at any grit, and not just wood, but plastic, leather, concrete, metal, you name it, So it's a far superior foundation, tung oil versus linseed oil. Tung oil also doesn't deteriorate over time. It is not susceptible to bacteria breaking down. So if you're involved with historical projects, if you use Odie's, you actually set up a lifespan for the floor that potentially can last hundreds of years. Of a film forming product, any product, doesn't matter how hard your top coat is. If it's a mechanical bond, and the entire system relies on that mechanical bond, we know there's no mechanical bond that can last hundreds of years, right? We know that. So any product that is built on that system is going to mean that even if let's say best case scenario, it wears amazingly, there's no issues otherwise, but eventually that mechanical bond starts to break down and deteriorate over time, and the wood needs to be sanded. So no matter what, eventually that wood is getting sanded, or need to be sanded, right? And since that can only be done so many times, you have now put a life restriction, limitation on that wood. So think about this. None of the historic floors from 700, 800, or even there are some floors older than that, 1,000 years old, none of them would be around today if they were treated with today's modern finishes. That's a sobering thought. So what Odie's does is it builds on that time-proven system, because we have floors that are 700, 800 years old. I walked on William Shakespeare's birthhouse, floors in his birthhouse in Stratford-upon-Avon in England. 700-year-old original oak floors. It's still around today. How come? Well, because the old European floors were treated with natural oils that were not film forming like today's modern finishes. They did not need a mechanical bond, so therefore it was possible to maintain those floors without sanding, and that's the trick to make a wood floor last hundreds of years. So when you have a client who spent millions of dollars on a historic home, and they're emotionally attached to preserving that original floor. Any other finish that requires a mechanical bond, okay, that has a catalyst usually, but sometimes it's built in. But if it tells you to stop sanding at a certain grit, you know it needs a mechanical bond. It relies on the mechanical bond. So you tell that client that if you put these finishes on any of them, you will extend the life of your floor by decades. But if you put odie'soil on, and it's truly a structural oil that can be maintained without sanding, now you have extended that from decades to potentially centuries. And to me, and I think any client that is emotionally attached to a historic home, that means everything. You know, that is one of the reasons why I love odie'soil, is because it really is the best way to preserve wood. Not just a few years or decades, but potentially centuries. So anyway, now is the towel. You want to use a terry cloth, cotton terry cloth towel, not microfiber and not synthetic anything. And just a good old-fashioned cotton terry cloth. And much like the same way as we did the white pad, same exact thing. And the reason why, by the way, why you didn't need to do white pad on the edges, I just went straight to the terry cloth, is because when the buffer does the white pad, you're going all the way up to the trim, and you are, and you know it's pretty much covering it. So your white pad on the buffer is covering all of it. You're just getting that 1/4 inch excess oil that the buffer can't get. But that's why you don't need to do the white pad by hand. And likewise, as with the white pad, you want to be changing that, keep looking at it periodically, and maybe every 80 to 100 square feet. If you put on the oil the way I taught you, healing the buffer, it will go 100 square feet. But it might only be 50 square feet if you put too much oil on, right? The point is you gotta remove everything. So you gotta keep checking your white pad and the towel, make sure that it's still clean. If it's sticky and you got a good buildup on it, change it. That is not where you wanna save money. The test that you want to do to see if you have removed enough and everything is make sure you dry your fingers. No sweaty fingers, no oily fingers. It's hard because you've been working with oil. Even when you wipe it really hard in a dry towel, there's still a bit of a residue, but try to clean your hand as much as possible, make sure it's dry. Then, with a medium pressure, rub your fingers into the wood. If you're leaving any marks whatsoever, you gotta keep buffing. I can see nothing, no marks whatsoever. So the floor is dry. When you did your job dry, you didn't put too much oil on. You spread it with the way I taught, with the healing. Or even if you did put a little extra on, but as long as you removed it all, the floor should be dry to the touch. As soon as you're done buffing off, and with socks, you'll be able to walk on it. With shoes, I would say the next day. Water resistance, typically after 3 days. But full cure is about 2 weeks. Don't put any area rugs down during that time. But again, if you're leaving marks or if your towel is dirty, sticky, keep going until your towel is clean and until you can rub your hand. Actually, not just medium pressure, it's all my strength. Nothing, no marks at all. So that's pretty cool. Thanks for watching. This was the first application. We don't say code because we're not a film forming product. So the first feeding of the wood, if you will, with the Super Duper, the regular universal ODs, I'm gonna do in 48 hours. Like I said earlier, you could do it the next day, but unless you have to, and you have the luxury of time, might as well give it 2 days, because there's less of a chance of reactivating the oil. Nothing's bad's gonna happen, even if you do, but you're just gonna reactivate and it's gonna mix together a little bit. But unless it's humid, super humid, and there's no AC in the house and cold, but mostly humidity, then you definitely want to wait 48 hours. Typically 24 hours is in a dry, warm environment is enough. But again, I'm just gonna play it super safe and wait 48 hours. Then I'm gonna repeat everything again with the universal oil. So another benefit of using the Super Duper first is that Super Duper is thinner, a little easier to spread. Although universal, once there's friction and heat, it also thins out nicely from that. But by hand, at least with the edges, the Super Duper is definitely easier there. But the second benefit is that once you fed the wood with this thinner oil as much as it can take, it's going to now take a lot less of the universal oil as well. So see you in 48 hours. So we just had an Instagram live that I demoed oiling the floor, and so half the floor is already done. And this time I have a Bluetooth in, and I have to speak loudly, otherwise the noise protection part cuts off my voice as well. So anyway, this is the universal oil application. A couple days later, and I just vacuumed the floor and mixed the oil really well. You want to stir the oil really well, and strip myself a little line. Right? And I already did that this section, so I didn't want to do too much, but you strip yourself a little line. This time, I used 2 jars for the room. The first time, I'm going to use 1 jar, for the second application, because it used a lot less oil, about half as much. So again, go slowly and heal the buffer. First, I drive into it fast just to distribute the drips, get rid of the drips, distribute the oil, as much as I can. Then I go back and do it slow, healing the buffer. Am I still in the shot? I think so. This time, instead of my son recording me, I have it on a tripod. So I'm just gently healing the buffer and going slow, working it in, working it in, working it in. Remember, I specified it's better to go 1 time slow than 10 times fast. This is not what you want to be doing. You're not spreading the oil. You are pushing the oil in, working it in, and you need friction and heat. And after I do the slow healing of the buffer, it leaves a little extra behind as I'm heading this way. It leaves these little lines, crescent moon-shaped lines, excess oil. So I go back to pick it up, then I come down to do my next row. And again, I am now doing the next row, healing the buffer, going slow. But the pleasure of not having to stop and go and change pads because you don't have to complete sections in 20-minute, 10 to 20-minute intervals. To me, that was always so annoying, having to change red pad to white pad to the cotton towel, all of it within 15, 20 minutes. So that means 5 to 7 minutes apart. You're stopping, going, switching pads, right? Okay, go back on the path. Next row. So it's a pleasure. Odie's is a pleasure to work with. Even though you're going slow, you're gaining that wasted time back. Not to mention, there's no wasted product because there's no product being catalyzed with isocyanates. So you're not getting killed by cancer from isocyanates, which is a nice thing. But you're also not wasting product that's been catalyzed and is going to go bad on you. So between no stopping and going, no wasted product, you can afford to slow down. And of course, charge for it, charge accordingly for the extra labor. You're saving on material. Material cost, 1 ounce covers 20 square feet, roughly 25 square feet actually. 9 ounce charge easily covers 250 square feet. For this coat, my 9 ounce charge is going to cover 320. The reason why the first coat took a little more than usual is because the reactive that I was using is essentially water mixed with some chemicals. So it's basically like water popping the floor, which is why it took up a lot more oil the first time. But I'm done with that. This coat is probably going to yield me 350 square feet for 1 jar, 9 ounce jar. That's almost 40 square feet per ounce, right? So it's tremendous. The coverage is tremendous. Picking up, this red pad goes semi-dry, so rather than putting all that little bit of extra oil that's here now into the white pad, I'm going to save some of the white pad for buffer so it can go longer. I'm going to pick up a little bit of excess. If there is any on the floor, I'll pick it up with this red pad. After driving it, healing it, I really worked the oil out of it, so
when I go back slowly, and if there's any excess oil in there, it will get caught in the pad and be picked up by the pad. So it does remove a little bit, as well as applying it. It applies it when you have a lot of oil on the floor and healing the buffer. Once it's dry, the pad has gone dry, and you go back and already been applied, there's a little excess oil sitting there, that will be picked up. So here's my little line. Okay, so I'm just driving the machine in too fast to spread it, get rid of the line. Go back and heal.
When you first wipe it, you can feel resistance, and when it gives way and suddenly glides easily, then you're good. Don't make the mistake of thinking, since the durability, performance, water resistance, chemical resistance, all that comes from the oil. Don't make the mistake assuming that if you leave a little extra on, it'll be better, because actually it'll be a lot worse. Any part of the oil doesn't become part of the wood, is not going to be waterproof, chemical proof, is not going to wear well. It's going to scratch easily with this annoying chalky residue. So get everything off. Okay, went around the edges, wiped up the edges with a rag. Now the white pad is under the buffer. And then after that, we're going to put the white rags, cotton rags, under the buffer. So again, just like last time, you don't have to heal the buffer, but you do have to go slow. This step is really easy. You don't have to worry about healing. You don't have to worry about spreading evenly and then healing the buffer and going slow. Just simply relax and away. And now the final buff off with the white cotton towel. Again, 100% cotton, not synthetic. And go slow. finish this up for my own. I hope you found this guide helpful. Any questions, feel free to email me, call me. I'll put the contact info at the end of the video. Take care.